So let's go ahead and begin. This is, I think, our fifth class in this course on getting to know your mind. And we're going to just start with a couple of prayers. So let me get those on the screen. Let's see, right there. Recite the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha 3 times. The founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go refuge. To the founder, the endowed destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyapsu chi daki chanyen gipe sonam gi dola penchir sangye dupar shog Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyapsu chi Daki chanyan gipe sonam gi dola penchir sangye duparsho. All right, as usual, let's just do a short meditation to focus the mind a bit, let go of whatever distractions we might have from our day, and then to generate a good motivation for being here. So as usual, spend the first few minutes focusing on the breath in order to calm the mind, trying to keep the awareness with the breath in whatever way you're choosing to work with the breath. And whenever you see that the mind has wandered, just gently guide the mind back to the breath. So we'll do this in silence for just a few minutes, and then I'll lead you in a short reflection to set our motivation for tonight. So now to set our motivation for our time together tonight, we can recall that fundamental premise that the Buddha worked with that we need to remind ourselves of constantly because it's the basis upon which all of our practice is supported. The idea that every single sentient being, just like ourselves, is seeking happiness and wanting to not suffer. And yet, most of these beings are really misguided in terms of where the causes of happiness reside. And of course, what they can attribute their suffering to. Where does that come from? Without the teachings of the Buddha, these beings will continually be misguided in how they seek out their welfare. And every one of us has met with these teachings that we're pursuing in this course in particular, to look at the contents of our own minds, to get to know the various states of mind, the factors in the mind that do cause greater well-being versus those that cause us to suffer, to have to experience pain and so on. We've met with these teachings and we can rejoice in our good fortune. But wouldn't it be ideal to be able to share these teachings with others, to help them to know how to achieve the goals that they seek? And especially when we consider that every one of these beings has been incredibly kind to us, particularly in the lifetimes where we've had them for our dear mother or father, someone who cared for us very much, greatly. Every being has been in that position of helping us in an unbelievable way. And now that we have this opportunity, having met with the Dharma, how could we exclude them from our aims? How could we only think about our own welfare? So we generate the motivation of bodhicitta that sees all sentient beings through the lens of love and compassion, and wishes to benefit every one of them, bring them to a complete understanding of how to work with their own minds to achieve both temporal and ultimate happiness. So set this motivation of bodhicitta that strives to develop ourselves to the greatest degree, attaining the state of Buddhahood, so we then can help others perfectly, spontaneously, so they too can achieve the same state. And then you can open your eyes completely and we will begin. So in the last class, we finished off the topic of attachment, and you had some exercises to work with to try to bring an awareness of how attachment arises, all the various features of it. We looked at even the 3 close or proximate afflictions that are in the same category as attachment, that are driven by attachment, they're derived from attachment. So before I go further into the next main delusion that we're going to be spending some time with, which is an important one, anger, this kind of aversion energy that is happening when we are dealing with those things that are unpleasant. Let's see if there are any questions or comments from the last week of working with this, or anything that came up in your practice that you wanted to share. Anyone online? If you are online, maybe just click on your little icon down there under your, I don't know where it is now in these, but anyway, under React, you can hit the raise hand thing there and then we will call on you. So, but anyone here in the Gompa as well? Yes, Josan, we've got the microphone for you. Thank you for using that so folks can hear.
I really enjoyed watching my attachments. And one day I had a moment where I was craving a coffee, even though I don't usually drink coffee, and I know it's not good for me, so I don't usually. And I parked at the coffee shop. I mean, I went right over there. And then I said, oh, an attachment. Oh, let's watch. And I sat there for almost 25 minutes. I did not get a coffee, but I just felt the craving and the repeated cycle of like, okay, I don't need a coffee. And oh, I think you could use a coffee. And it went on and on and on for that amount of time. And finally it just subsided and I drove away without having coffee. So it was very interesting to watch. So.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Josan. Yeah, Lou, you wanted
Yeah,
to.
it was just today that I was on Amazon and I was looking at Blu-ray DVDs, and I came across an old BBC series called Torchwood. And it was a complete Torchwood. So I put it in my car and I just sat there thinking, am I ever going to watch this? So anyway, I probably closed the whole thing down.
Yeah. Good. No,
Oh, I'm sorry. And the thing, it had keywords like only one left.
yeah, they do that to you. Only one left. Order now before we run out, you know. Well, I mean, again, these are great examples. And again, we may find at times that the objects of attachment that we are craving are not necessary. And that's perfectly fine. That's a valid conclusion to come to, because frequently we are creating our own patterns of craving, of attachment and what have you. But once more, recognize that the problem doesn't reside in the object. The problem resides in our relationship to the object. So it's totally possible. And maybe I wanted to even share a little bit in regard to the question that came up last time at the end, when we, can't remember, Scarlett, I think was her name, who was online. And she asked about when she's going out, she's a foodie and goes to restaurants and has these wonderful meals and what have you. And I gave her the suggestion of trying to engage in that without the attachment, recognize, okay, this is food. I have to eat food. I'm going to watch the pleasure that arises, but try not to grasp, cling at it, And I think that's a difficult exercise. I mean, I might also mention that there are certainly many other ways to work with that. I mean, Venerable Rabina, I told you that one time, this was last week, I mentioned that we were sitting here in a restaurant in Santa Fe, and when dessert came, she was like, oh yeah, we talk about attachment and overcoming attachment, but all they have to do is put this piece of cake in front of me, and it's just like, it's all out the window, right? You just start shoving it in your mouth. And then she went on to say, she said, because I didn't share this part of it, she says, well, thank God that the Buddha has told us that we can do this with bodhicitta, at least, And I think that that's one of the things too, that oftentimes we have to remind ourselves that we can do these things with good motivation. I mean, sometimes maybe it's hard to put that on that particular activity, maybe with buying movies or things like that. It's like, how are we benefiting sentient beings by doing that? But when we're eating food, I mean, we can think about offering the bliss. I suppose you could offer the bliss of watching movies or whatever to others as well. There's no problem in thinking about others at the time when we're engaging in things that are pleasurable and wishing for them to have pleasure in their lives, wishing for them to have even more lasting forms of happiness in their life. This is what bodhicitta is all about, of course, we just meditated on, is be able to focus on other beings and say, I want them to have all manner of happiness, all the way from the simple pleasures of samsara, all the way through complete bliss of Buddhahood. I mean, this is what we are wanting for others. So when you're having a blissful experience of some sort, there's nothing wrong with engaging in that, feeling the pleasure, but thinking of others, thinking of bodhicitta. Yeah. I think I may have told many of this story before, but one of the times when Venerable Rabina was here leading a retreat, and I was, there helping out throughout the entire weekend. It was at Immaculate Heart of Mary Center here. Some of you in the room went to retreats there. And it was getting to the end of the retreat, and she was talking about one of the things that we do frequently to maintain our joyous effort, our enthusiasm for our practice, is what's called relinquishing, which means that you do have to set the Dharma work aside sometimes and recharge. Do what you need to do to attend to yourself, not out of like some hedonistic motivation, but rather so that we can continue to do the work. And I raised my hand and I said, Venerable Robina, sometimes this can be a slippery slope because it's very easy to just say, oh yeah, I'm going to go do this and I'm going to go do that and I'm just taking care of myself. And I said, for example, because this was at the time when Downton Abbey was on Sunday nights on PBS. And I said, for example, here we've gone through this whole weekend. It's coming up Sunday night. I can't wait to go home and just sit in front of the TV and watch Downton Abbey. Of course, she didn't care for Downton Abbey, so she made a comment about that. But she said, well, Don, if you're going to sit down and watch Downton Abbey, you're going to do it with bodhicitta or you're not going to do it at all. And so this is the thing. It's like if we really recognize the patterns of craving that we have in our lives and we just keep following them blindly, then all we do is strengthen our attachment. Our desire becomes more and more and more habituated. We talked about how habit is one of the factors that can lead to the arisal of these delusions to a greater degree. So again, try to change your mind at the time of those things. So when you are having a delicious meal, or you're sitting down to listen to some beautiful music, or you're watching a television show, or you're going out in nature on a beautiful day when everything is really quite nice and the air is fresh and what have you, and you're enjoying your time out there. Don't just do that with this selfish motivation. Do this with the mind of bodhicitta. Do this with a thought of wishing to benefit others. I find that sometimes easier than perhaps trying to have the pleasure and not have the attachment arise. Maybe replace the mind of attachment with the mind that cherishes others, that wishes for them to experience happiness. I think it's a wonderful way to work with these things. So afterwards, I thought, oh, I should have said more about that too, because I think many people will benefit from that. And of course, your Mahayana path has benefited from that. When we do think of others, there's the practice of Tonglen that many of you are familiar with, where you take on suffering and you give away happiness. It's essentially that. When we have a pleasurable experience, think about giving it to others. You're gonna still have the pleasure of putting that food in your mouth or listening to the music or whatever the case might be. But think of others. Think of, I'm doing this so I can benefit others so that they can experience happiness. May they have the bliss that is their kind of birthright by virtue of having Buddha nature. So again, these are thoughts that you can introduce that will change your patterns of thinking. So you're not always just blindly following your craving mind over here, over there, everywhere. Okay. Any other comments or questions on this? Attachment is a tricky one to work with. Remember there is that analogy that's used for it, that it is like oil in cloth. Like if you've ever gotten oil on a cloth, olive oil when you're cooking on a shirt or something, that it just like seeps right in. It becomes a part of the cloth. This is what happens in our minds. This attachment just has become kind of our default mode. It's how we go about doing everything that we do in our lives pretty much. Wanting this, wanting that. What do I need next? What kind of tea should I drink now? Everything becomes like this following desire. So it's very hard to extricate it from the mind. And of course, when we get to the tantric teachings, which is maybe way beyond where some of you are right now, that's okay. You're even kind of trying to work with that desire energy, but desire itself is problematic. It's a mind that is never going to lead us to any sort of satisfaction. So recognize that there is something there in that force that we can maybe work with, and work with it in a variety of ways. Certainly in Tantra, you work with it in a much more profound way. But in essence, the mind of desire is never going to lead to any real lasting peace or happiness. We're going to be continually plagued by that kind of disturbing mind, which once more, we don't often see as disturbing, as I talked about last week. Tonight, we're going to move into the opposite thing, which again, attachment is about, once more, to go back to those first few mental factors that we looked at, the omnipresent mental factors. We have contact with a pleasant object, an object that for us has that karma of producing a pleasant feeling. That's the second of those omnipresent mental factors. We discriminate it as something that we want and desire. And then, of course, we have the intention that moves towards it, and the attention that pays attention to it, that gets involved in it, that wants to be with that object. What happens when we have the opposite experience of all those same factors, but we have an unpleasant object that we come into contact with, produces an unpleasant feeling that we discriminate as something that we don't want in our lives? That's what we're going to talk about tonight, what we call frequently anger. It's first time I was introduced to this, I think the teacher was using the term aversion, and I still use that. Someone said that, that sounds like something that, children have towards vegetables or something, but it's the same kind of energy. Aversion means I'm having that unpleasant experience. That feeling is being induced, and I'm averse to it. I don't want to experience that. I want to push that out of my field of experience as quickly as possible. And sometimes I will even engage in non-virtuous behavior to do that. Yelling at somebody who I don't like, or, hopefully not doing something physical to the people or beings that we don't like. We have a lot to learn from working with anger as well. Just as we can see with attachment, we can begin to examine our minds and what's going on in that driving force that is causing us to be engaged in that. We can see that anger's got some of the same lessons because it's essentially, as Venerable Rabina would often point out, it's what happens when attachment doesn't get what it wants, when it's like thwarted in getting the pleasure, the happiness that we seek. So that's happening frequently throughout our day as well. Maybe not as often as the craving mind is present, but any time that the craving mind is going, oh, I want it to be like this, and then it's not. You go to your favorite restaurant and you're already, in your mind, you've already pictured that meal that you really enjoy there. And you're getting ready to partake of it, and you sit down, and then the waiter, whoever the person comes and tells you that, sorry, we don't have that today. Shipment didn't come in. And you go, and you just like totally lose it, right? Sometimes you could get even upset and verbally abuse this person, this poor person who's only simply kind of passing along that information. But nonetheless, this is what happens when we don't get what we want, when we have to face those things that are undesirable, which the Buddha set out in his description of what the faults of samsara are, is one of the main ones, that we are often going to be dealing with dissatisfaction. Because even when we get what we want, that doesn't last usually. There's something happens with it, or it changes, something breaks, whatever the case might be. So this is a pattern that we really do have to spend some time examining and come to really appreciate what it's all about. Let me go to the text, and we'll start again. This is the text from Venerable Venerable Gyatso, who lives in Australia, wonderful monk. Again, whoops, I can't go that big. Let's go to what his description of anger is. This is on page 103 of your text. Anger observes a contaminated object. Both of these are observing contaminated objects, attachment and anger, whose bad qualities are exaggerated. Rather than in attachment, the good qualities are exaggerated, and the good qualities are ignored by this improper attention. And we're going to talk about that more in a moment, but that was one of those 6 factors that gives rise to a delusion, is that we are thinking about things in a distorted way at a very fundamental level in terms of the root ignorance, but moreover, in terms of all these different things that we are exaggerating, layering upon objects, such as thinking of them as being, not just inherently what they are, but inherently bad and having only bad qualities. We can't even see the good qualities at that time. Goes on to say, anger sees the object as undesirable and wishes to separate from it by harming or destroying it, or in some way, distancing ourselves from it. Doesn't always necessarily want to harm or destroy, but generally when we talk about the heightened forms of this affliction, we're talking about a mind that wishes to harm. Like attachment, anger is a mistaken consciousness, because although it observes its object correctly, just like attachment does, it apprehends its object as actually possessing the exaggerated or superimposed bad qualities. In other words, we're having an experience that is grounded in some legitimacy because it's producing, through our contact with it, a pleasurable or an unpleasant feeling, in this case, for the mind of anger. But we're engaging with that in this exaggerated way and superimposing more negativity on it than what is actually there. As it says in that next bit, anger can be directed towards a sentient being, towards the suffering in one's own body or mind, or an inanimate object, such as a thorn, or, in the summer here in New Mexico, they have those little, they call them toritos, bull's head, that have those really sharp, thistles on them or whatever. And so you could get really upset at something that is harming you in that way, even though it's just an object and not a being that's doing that. There are actually 9 situations in which we become angry at any of these objects. Anger directed towards someone or something that has harmed in the past, is harming in the present, or will harm me in the future. And then towards someone or something that has harmed, is harming, or will harm my friends. Because we don't only get upset at what happens to us, we get upset at what happens to those that we're close to, that we generally have attachment towards. And then towards someone or something that has helped, is helping, or will help my enemy. So again, we have that tendency to get involved in patterns of anger around any of these particular situations. We get upset when people are taking the side of the people that we don't like or befriending them. We also get upset when somebody harms those people that we love and care about. So again, this is the pattern that we have with anger, is that it is having a negative experience, overlaying all kinds of negativity on it that isn't actually there, and then reacting from that place. So this exaggeration. I mean, just look at what happens ourselves. I mean, some of us, I'm sure, probably every one of us has had some sort of experience where we were in an environment where somebody upset us and we said something really negative to them, and maybe a complete stranger, right? Or we did something that they saw as offensive. Maybe we got into line and we didn't even see that there were other people in line, and then somebody got really upset at us because we were cutting in line. And at that moment, we can see what it's to be on the receiving end of anger. When somebody is looking at us and they're making an assessment of who we are that is purely negative, right? That person doesn't know us from anyone, and they are putting us in that category of, you are this horrible, awful person because you took the parking spot that I was supposed to get, or you did this, or you did that. Is that an accurate portrayal of who you are? No, right? Because we know we're so much more than that. We're not just that person who happens to do that one negative thing, either intentionally or unintentionally. We have many other facets to ourselves that are being ignored at that time. We're being lumped together into this category of someone who is bad, negative, does things that are offensive, without any recognition that we could be anything other than that. So what if we know what it's like to be on the receiving end of that? Well, then that's what we're doing with other people, particularly with other people or other situations to some degree. We are overlaying on them this totally negative view. They are nothing but this horrible person who is offending me, offending the person that I love, or helping the person that I, have some animosity towards or whatever. So again, these are the different situations that we find ourselves in, and we need to recognize that exaggerating quality that we are doing with regard to all of the delusions. Once more, there's an overlay of inherent existence that we're going to get into in a couple of weeks. We're going to go on to pride next week, hopefully, and work with pride. But this ignorance that's guiding and driving the whole show, that is operative at that time. But then we build all this overlay of additional mistaken conceptualization on top of it. As long as we keep doing that, we're going to have problematic experiences. We're not going to be able to actually see clearly and then, make decisions and behaviors that are rooted wisdom rather than rooted in our delusion. So let's take a look at a few things I've assembled on the slides here to go through. And this is where we're at. We're looking at the second of the 6 root afflictions. I did put ignorance third on here. I may have to change my list because actually it's generally listed as fourth in the way that it's presented. So we will go on to pride, as I said, next week. Hopefully we'll cover all of anger or aversion tonight. Whoops. Again, this is from the Dalai Lama in Venerable Chodron's book. Anger arises based on projecting or exaggerating the unattractive qualities of an object or person. It agitates the mind through being unable to bear or through wanting to harm that object or person. It can arise in reference to a being who harms us, the suffering itself, as Venerable Gyatso said, or the cause of the harm, the thorn or whatever it is, the words that someone says the object that we are being harmed by. Then going on to share a little bit of what Geshe Rabton says, which I will share on some of these root delusions, because I think it's nice to see, again, different explanations of these that'll be common in some places, but also a slightly different flavor here and there. Anger is a distinct mental factor that, in reference to one of three objects, again, the three objects we just saw, the person who harms you, the suffering itself, as well as the object that you're harmed by, it agitates the mind through being unable to bear or through intending to cause harm to the object. It has the function of disturbing and roughening the mind. I like this little phrase because it really, we know that this is disturbing, and yet we go back to anger again and again. It really upsets our minds. It's not peaceful to have anger in our minds at all. And it roughens our minds. It makes our minds kind of more agitated, more capable of being irritated. So we don't have this kind of light, soft, gentle mind. We have this rough mind that is unable to bear any level of suffering or difficulty. Just as attachment over-exaggerates the attractiveness of the object, anger is a mistaken conception that over-exaggerates the displeasing aspect of its object. It causes us to see certain people or things in a very disagreeable and unpleasant light. Thus, the way in which we relate to one another is frequently colored by the fabrication of subjective mental images that completely distort the reality of the situation. We talk about that because, again, remember that I talked about earlier, way back at the beginning of this course, of this idea of mental images. Our conceptual mind is knowing things in a non-direct way. We are not working with the actual objects. We are working with an idea of that object, what we call, again, this generic image or mental image. Conceptuality cannot get at its objects directly. It knows them through this medium, through that thing that appears to us that we mistakenly think is the object. And that's why we can have these sorts of experiences that I was just talking about, where we can take someone who says something offensive to us and we take an idea of them and we make it all negative. We make it into this horrible, awful person that now we're having to deal with. We don't see that that person could be having other things going on in their lives that are causing them to do that, but that's not, again, who they really are. They're not somebody where everywhere they go, they're being offensive to everyone that appears to them. I mean, that's pretty unlikely. You may have a rare person in this world who's that way, but even that is not something set in stone. I'm sure they have other moments when they are actually quite kind and gentle with the people that they care about, or with their pets, or what have you. The mind of anger is taking an idea of that person, working with it, putting all this stuff on top of it, and in a way then justifying our aversion towards that person or that situation. This is what happens is, our conceptual mind is very tricky at being able to justify why our delusions are necessary or why they're valid. And they are never valid because they're always distortions. As long as we keep this process going up and bringing the object in a sense, in this very generic kind of way, not the real person at all, not encompassing certainly all their good qualities, only seeing their bad qualities, then we're going to continue to relate to that object in a distorted way and overlay, again, all this negativity that isn't really there. Once more, even the negativity that is happening, that we're experiencing, that we're coming into contact with, the unpleasant sensation, that's our particular karma. That may not be, again, something that is cast in stone with regard to even how we might look at that experience differently. We're going to see this when we start to talk about tonight how we work with anger. Having situations where anger comes up can actually be a great boon to our practice if we're able to work with that anger at that time, to actually see why it's arising, to change our minds. Again, all of our delusions, this is the one thing, in this whole course, getting to know your mind. We're not talking about exiling our roommates. Remember, I used that phrase that Venerable Robina says, it's like we need to get to know all the crazy roommates that we have in this little room we call our mind, that are hanging out with us. Well, it doesn't mean that we exile them necessarily. We see what we can learn from them. Oh, here's that crazy roommate attachment and desire. Let's see what it's showing me and what it's speaking to me in terms of my own distorted patterns and ways of thinking that I can change. What is anger teaching us? How is it showing us things, truths about samsara, things that we need to be aware of, how we need to change how we relate to those things? This is the way we need to work with all of these crazy roommates, is see, what can we learn from them? What can we do differently to lessen their loud voice in our minds? They're going to still be there hanging out in our minds. Remember, that's one of the main causes that is at the beginning of this list of 6, saying that as long as we have the seed of anger or the seed of attachment there, we will continue to be subject to that delusion arising on occasion. But we have to make their voice a little lower, have them not be such a noisy roommate for us. Try to learn from them and see how we can do things different in relation to them so that we're not following them and getting ourselves into trouble. Because with anger in particular, this is why anger, oftentimes there's a lot of focus on really working to combat our anger. The whole 6th chapter of Master Shantideva's text is all about developing patience in the face of something that would normally trigger our anger. It's because anger is the most destructive emotion. It's often compared to fire, and look at the fires in California, right? When we kind of have the seed of this discontent, this aversion energy that becomes like flames that just start burning. And then you kind of have the winds of your mistaken conceptions that feed that, that actually keep that growing and developing. This is why it's incredibly important to work with anger. I may spend a little more time than just tonight, depending on how tonight goes and what sorts of comments I get from others as well. But this is an important one to work with, especially if you see that this is one of your main triggers as well, that you are getting constantly drawn into situations where you're getting upset, angry, even spiteful or resentful towards the people or situations around you. It's really a destructive emotion. We call them all destructive emotions, but this is perhaps the most destructive. Going on then to these 6 factors, again, in Venerable Gyatso's text, he does bring these in, but he's got a slightly different approach to one of them. So I'm just going to talk about them very briefly, because we're not going to go into these with regard to everything, but I think it is useful, particularly on these root afflictions, to spend a little time, because then we see what goes on that's kind of behind the scenes. The first one is what I just mentioned. The basis is the seeds or the karmic imprints of the afflictions, in this case, anger. The reason why we have anger arising is because we have a seed of anger that's on our mental continuum that when the proper conditions come about, it will bring forth the mind of anger. We will never be rid of those seeds until we do the deeper work that removes the root ignorance that's driving the whole show. But nonetheless, be aware that that's part of why anger arises, is because you've planted these seeds. Every time you've gotten angry in the past and had that mind arise, you've planted another seed for it to arise again. It's essentially the karma of the karma, the karmic result that is similar to the cause in terms of the behavior that we've engaged in. As long as we keep doing that, having anger arise again and again, we will keep planting more and more seeds. Secondly, the object appearing to our mind. In this case, it's something that you find unpleasant. Once more, there's nothing inherent about those objects that make them unpleasant. This is a particular karma that you have with that particular object. I mean, we talked about this when I was talking about music, right? Music's one of my strong attachments that I deal with frequently. But the idea is that when we have such a strong attachment to our own music, and then somebody plays music that is the opposite of that, or something that we cannot stand because we have a very different karma with that music. It sounds, like noise. It sounds like something that we would never, ever enjoy. Well, then we think that that is inherently bad music, and what we like is inherently good music. But that isn't there for the person who's having the wonderful experience of listening to that music that we detest. They're enjoying it. They're having a good time, blaring it through their car as they drive around or whatever. They're enjoying their music in the same way that we enjoy our music. Yeah, there's nothing inherently there that makes it into an unpleasant object. But for us, we have the karma to have that experience. So it appears to us as unpleasant, again, through the force of our contact with it. It's already kind of coming into our sphere of experience as something unpleasant. It induces an unpleasant feeling. And then, of course, we react to it. But the object does play a key role. And as I mentioned previously, um, because of this, there is some value in distancing ourselves from objects of anger initially. If there are certain people who trigger you in terms of their behavior, the way they talk, the things they say, their political views, whatever the case might be, it might be wise not to be in their presence until you've developed more skill and ability to be in their presence and not go mouthing off at them, everything that they say or do. Right? So this is, as I mentioned previously, what I often call the first line of defense. Create some space between yourself and the object because the object plays a key role. The third thing that on the list and the way that I present it is the incorrect mental attention, which I've already spoken about tonight. That's where we are once more tuning into that unpleasant sensation and we're overlaying negative qualities to that entire object, that person or that situation or whatever. We are exaggerating the negative elements of it. And once more, those aren't inherently there either. They aren't even there conventionally, though. We are overlaying stuff on top of it that is way beyond what the actual experience karmically of that unpleasant music or unpleasant food or whatever the case might be. Those three, as I pointed out when we went through this first, Geshe Sopa says, are the key things that are always there when a delusion arises. You have the seed in the mind of anger, in this case, an unpleasant object appearing to our mind, and then the incorrect mental attention that exaggerates that unpleasantness. As I said last time, the remaining three are there frequently, but they don't have to be there. Habituation is what I was speaking to earlier, that we might be very habituated to having anger in our minds. By the way, I'm going to try to frequently do that whenever I'm talking about some of these things, to talk about having them in our minds. And you might wonder, why am I doing that? Rather than saying, and I just slipped up a little while ago and saying we get angry. What happens is to some degree, we do habituate ourselves to these delusions when we think that we're kind of identifying with them. When I think I'm angry, that means kind of who you are is angry. I like the phrase that there is anger arising in my mind because it gives a little distance already. It sees that anger is this condition that is coming into our minds on the basis of various causes and things that give rise to it, those 6 factors that we were talking about. It is not something that is who I am. I am not my anger. I am not my attachment. Of course, you get into the deeper investigation of who is there. That's a whole nother one we'll get into later. But nonetheless, to identify with these things, people can do that and get to a place where, and I'm sure we know people, where people say, that's just who I am. I'm an angry person, right? I can't change. And they identify with their anger so much that there's no room there for any other view, that they could be something else, that they could be more patient, and more kind, and more tolerant at those times when things arise that are not pleasant. So once more, I think it's important that we even watch our language and how we talk about how we work with these afflictions to understand that we're not angry people. We are people who are having anger arise in our minds. It's arising due to various causes and conditions. Those can be changed. That's why, once more, causality is one of the biggest teachings that the Buddha gave, because everything depends upon that if you are able to change the causes, you can change the result. That's what we're trying to do here. That's what we're trying to do in all of our Buddhist practice. The other two that were on the screen have to do with factors outside of ourselves that can be a causal factor, a condition that leads to, in this case, anger arising, the influence of misleading friends or social distraction. I mean, all you have to do is, if you have a particular point of view, start posting things on social media, for example, these days, and you'll get all kinds of people supporting you, right? They give you a thumbs up and they say, yeah, you're right, this person's awful, and da-da-da-da. We get a lot of that feedback that fans the flames of our own anger, right? And of course, friends, people who we say, oh, you won't believe what my boss did to me today. And then they validate it completely. Oh, you're right. And you should tell them exactly what they should do, and da-da-da-da, right? The last one, following false teachings or explanations. We live in a culture where there is a sort of acceptance that people will get angry and upset and that's a good thing. Now, once more, I do want to be careful with this word anger. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, in his book, commenting on chapter 6 of Shantideva that I mentioned earlier, he says that he doesn't like the word anger in English because he feels that there are some forms of justifiable anger. Now, again, if we're going to use that phrase, justifiable anger, we have to define what we mean by that. We mean a sense of kind of things not being right in the world that we want to address. You know, when there is unfairness, injustice, people who are not treated in the way that they should be treated by others. And we can do that with a mind that isn't about this person and that person, this is the good person, this is the bad person, where we have compassion for all, where we are thinking about compassion for the perpetrator as well as the victim. Well, then we can go about this form of more justifiable anger. The problem is that in so many of our environments where it starts off as that, people out there with a good intention, with a good cause, with things that they want to be addressed, have addressed in the world, it frequently degenerates into unhealthy anger, right? I mean, look at any of the demonstrations and things, Black Lives Matter, all these things. There's a tendency starting off with a very peaceful, justifiable anger kind of approach, and then it becomes an anger that is really biased. So I think we have to be careful. His Holiness does say that he prefers that we don't use the word anger, maybe use the word hatred for this delusion. But nonetheless, if you're going to talk about a justifiable form of this, you have to really look at what it's rooted in. It's going to be rooted in the opposite of anger, which is a mind that is having compassion, love, concern for everyone involved. So I just wanted to point that out because some of you may even hear His Holiness talk about this on occasion, and I think it is important that we have an understanding of what is meant by that. So as I did with the previous one, I'm going to talk a little bit about the opposite, which is among our virtuous mental factors, non-anger or non-hatred. This is the opposite of this delusion that we're talking about. And let me share with you what Venerable Children and the Dalai Lama say. Non-hatred is the opposite of animosity. It is love and benevolence, not just the absence of anger and ill will, right? Because I'm hoping all of you right now don't have any anger or ill will in your mind, right? You don't have, though, non-hatred because we're talking about something that is not just the absence of that, it is the love and benevolence that is in the place of that, what we're really trying to generate. When referring to someone who harms us, the harm itself or the cause of the harm, again, those three objects of anger, it has the characteristic of love instead and directly overcomes anger and hatred. It is the basis for the prevention of hostility and the increase of love, benevolence, forgiveness, and fortitude. So we're talking about a very powerful mind in our world, the mind that is choosing love and embracing beings with that view of compassion and kindness, as opposed to getting angry and upset at all of them and all the silly things that they're doing. And I think when we start looking at this from the point of view of, I was mentioning this earlier, what it's like when we are seen as the angry one, that we can really understand that we would want to have an opposing view for those who upset us, who are kind of out there engaging with that mind of anger in ways that are harming us or those that we love. We don't want to be on the receiving end of those sorts of negative thoughts or those sorts of assessments and quick judgments because we've had anger arise in our mind and done something. So the opposing mind is a mind that is embedded in love and looking at all sentient beings through the eyes of love. So let me share a little bit from the text. I do want to go back to the page that deals with that, just so you can see that. I think it's around 594. There it is. Good. I remembered well. Non-anger is the opposite of anger. Going down to that next kind of pinkish section, non-anger sees the faults of anger and the underlying nature of impermanence and emptiness of problematic things, and has no urge to act aggressively, and all the animosity is gone. Remaining in peace with no intention to harm, it has the aspect of loving kindness, the opposite of anger. There are 4 ways to train our mind in non-anger. I'm going to mention these and not go into them in that much detail. There are 4 situations where, we would more habitually have these sorts of reactions. Instead of blaming others when they blame us, we would not do that. Refrain from striking others when they strike us. Not getting angry with those who are angry at us. Not criticizing others when they criticize us. These are often called the four behaviors. And if you've taken the Bodhisattva vows, these are part of your secondary vows to avoid these types of behaviors. To not retaliate, in other words. When somebody does something to us that's of a particular nature, that we do the opposite, the exact same thing to them. Here, for engaging in non-hatred, non-anger, we want to do the opposite. Instead of blaming others when they blame us, we will gladly give them the victory. We will gladly have, thoughts of loving kindness and compassion towards them, and so on. I'm not going to go into that in great detail, but I think it is important that we understand that these are the sorts of opposing reactions to not do these habitual things and instead to do something that is rooted in love and kindness. Now, how do you do that? Well, we have to talk about that. Let's go to our slides and go into some of the behaviors. Well, actually, let me pull up the slide, and then I do need to go back to the text, because the very first way that we combat it is to reflect on the faults of anger, or again, having animosity, and also even to reflect on the benefits of patience. I often call this Buddhist advertising. We often get this, like, if you keep doing what you're doing, you're only going to accrue faults and problems. But if you do something totally different, that's much better for you, you're going to have all these great benefits, right? This is what so much of our advertising is about. But in the case of Buddhism, it's perfectly correct advertising, and it's something that we need to be attentive to. So, just in brief, the faults include the unpleasant experience of anger in the moment, as well as the effects on both yourself and others in the present and in the future. And to do a deeper meditation on that, we're going to go to these sections, pages 103 to 104, on the both categories, the obvious and the hidden faults of anger, and then the benefits of patience. That's a few pages later. So let's go to these, because I think this is oftentimes, this looking at the faults of something is really effective. I've used this example before, and I'll abbreviate it because I know I have. When you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you that there are certain things going on that are only going to lead to poor health, well, you pay attention to that generally. Most people will, and they'll say, okay, tell me what I should be doing. Well, avoid this food, do that, do this, do that, and you'll be much better. You'll be able to turn things around. Well, then we gladly do that. So this very first meditation, which we also had for attachment, remember we looked at the faults of attachment, we should be seeing the faults of anger, because we're often blind to that when anger is arising. We just go forward thinking, I've got to defend myself. I've got to say something in the face of this person accosting me. I've got to do something to rectify the situation and put that person in their place. And we don't see that there are grave faults to anger. Faults in the moment, faults in the, oops, I didn't brought up the wrong one again. Faults in the future. I mean, those are mostly the hidden faults, as he says. Let's go to that. It's going to be 104 in the PDF file. Paging down. Okay. This is again page 103 in the actual document. Anger destroys our mental equilibrium. An agitated mind cannot enjoy peace. I mean, I think this one is a bit obvious, but nonetheless, does it stop us? We will sometimes be okay with the mind getting to that very agitated place. But think about the way that anger affects you afterwards, and you can't put it out of your mind, and you keep trying to justify what you did, and you maybe can't even sleep at night. You might wake up in the morning and go, oh, I still have a bad taste in my mouth about that experience. Anger throws our inner physiology out of balance. It is a condition for both minor and major physical health problems. And people, once more, who have anger arising a lot, who see themselves as an angry person, as I mentioned earlier, often are dealing with high blood pressure. They're dealing with a lot of other physical problems due to hypertension and what have you, that can be really damaging to our bodies and our health. Third, anger makes us ugly. Even the most conventionally attractive face looks awful when angry. I'm not a big fan of how we've gotten to where, like, there are phones everywhere and people always like recording or taking pictures of anything that they find that's kind of, interesting to people. Let's just put it that way. But maybe we should be glad that there are ways that sometimes when people are doing things that are not showing them at their best light, that there's a way that they're bringing that to their attention by filming them. And I don't know if they happily go back and watch that and see somebody else post it or whatever. I think there can be a lot of difficult things that come about due to that type of freelance photography. But nonetheless, if someone took a picture of you when you were angry, you probably would go, "Oh my God, I look like that," right? Because when we see other people get angry, right? They get a bit red in the face and their eyes open wider and everything is just kind of distorted. They say the karma actually of having a mind of anger is to have an ugly appearance. And the karma of having a patient mind is to have a beautiful appearance. So if we find ourselves being considered to be somewhat attractive, we can be grateful that we must have practiced patience in the past. But if we want to have a more pleasing and beautiful appearance, then we need to practice patience now. But in the moment, absolutely, you don't look so good when you are angry. The next one, we forget the past kindness of friends and see them as our enemies, wanting to harm them or even kill them. This is what's weird is anger can arise certainly in our friendships, where suddenly we are getting upset at people that normally we would want to be kind to because of the kindness that they've shown us. Anger makes us irrational. We lose the ability to distinguish right from wrong, and we misconstrue situations by seeing them as threatening in one way or another. And people lose their judgment when they get angry, and they say and do things that they would normally not do. But because they have followed that train of anger and it's accelerated in their mind and what have you, they might see themselves as being threatened at that time and do things that are quite irrational. The last one on this page, or actually there's another one following, I think. Yeah, through anger, we expose others, ourselves to danger, and we destroy our precious possessions. I mean, if you find that this is something that you have done, that you've actually hit something or thrown something across the room or done something to your possessions, well, then that may be indicative of your anger needing to be addressed because you are actually doing harm to yourself and your possessions by virtue of that mind of anger arising. Throwing your phone across the room when you've just had a phone call with somebody that upset you, right? It doesn't harm anybody but yourself. Right? You're the one that's going to have to get a new phone or get it fixed or whatever the case might be. So again, these are ways that we can see that we definitely can have faults from this mind arising. A habitual angry disposition makes our family and friends ignore and finally abandon us. I mean, look at how many separations and uh, people being distant in their families that has occurred because of anger arising and people not being able to reconcile after the fact. The last one in that category of the obvious faults of anger, the world appears dark and threatening to an angry mind, and this can lead to paranoia. And these, I think, are pretty self-evident, most of these. What's interesting is the way he classifies this as the hidden faults of anger. These are generally the future effects of anger on the basis of karma. So actions performed out of anger create karmic potencies for rebirth and suffering states. I won't go into the whole description of these suffering states. We can see in our world that we share this world with animals. The animal realm is a suffering state, a lower state of existence. All the realms of samsara are suffering states in a way, but nonetheless, we have some that we identify as having more suffering. If we have a desire to avoid those unfortunate states, well, then we should be avoiding the mind of anger arising, and of course, the actions we engage in on the basis of a mind of anger, where we use harsh words at others, where we might even physically harm them or their possessions. So again, that's one thing to be aware of, is that when you have the mind of anger arising, you're creating the seeds for your own future suffering. When anger is manifest in the mind, it weakens or completely destroys our accumulation of positive karmic potencies. This is something Master Shantideva goes into in that 6th chapter that I will be referring to, I'm sure, frequently throughout this section. He says that being angry or upset, particularly at those beings who have great qualities, bodhisattvas and what have you, can destroy like 1,000 eons of your positive potential. It's these huge numbers, but don't even think in terms of the amount. Just think that the fact is that when you are getting angry and upset, once more, it's like a fire and it's burning up all the good things. I mean, look at even just in a relationship. If you have an incident with somebody where you get really upset, they get really upset, and you just have this anger back and forth, how it can kind of burn up all the goodwill that you had from prior time in that relationship. This is why people often separate too. And people will separate for many different reasons in terms of a friendship or an intimate relationship. But frequently you get to a place where you've just kind of exhausted all of what was good about the relationship by feeding the flames of anger that have led you to that conclusion about the relationship. And they were never really good for me. The relationship really wasn't that great. All of the goodwill that you've created through any type of meaningful relationship with anybody can be consumed like that. So if that can be consumed, what can it do to our good intentions and things that we've done in the past that are meritorious that can be consumed by the flames of anger as well? So it is said that we might not see that at that time, but nonetheless, it can be destroying, unbeknownst to us, our accumulation of merit. The third one, every moment of anger increases the strength of the seed of anger in our mind, so that in this life and even in future lives, we will have a strong tendency to have anger arise, to have that delusion again. Remember, that's one of the things that we did talk about, that you know, what gives rise to the afflictions is the seeds of the affliction that we planted. We're going to keep planting more and more anger, and moreover, you're going to also have that factor of habituation. You're going to be much more habituated to having anger arise because you've never put up any barrier to stop it. So these are quite a list of faults. Let's go to the benefits of patience, because I think it's worth touching on those just a little bit. I won't talk about them quite as much, but I think that can also be, this is kind of the stick. We have to look at the carrot as well and see the positive things that we do on the basis of us practicing the mind of patience. The patient person goes from happiness to happiness with few enemies, few conflicts, and close friendships with others. This is the karma you're creating. By not getting angry and upset at the people around you, you're creating more harmony in your life. You will have much greater happiness. Having been patient and free from anger in life, we die without regrets and are reborn in pleasant places, because once more, we haven't created those strong karmas that would throw us into the unpleasant places. And you can die without regret, knowing that you're not hanging on to some resentments towards others that were about those experiences of anger. Third, by conquering the inner enemy of anger, outer enemies cease to exist. What Rinpoche would always say, Lama Zopa, he would say, no enemy outside, no enemy inside, no enemy outside. If we don't have an enemy inside, if we haven't created that through our own anger and our own minds, then there's no enemy outside, really. The person outside, they're not in that category, because we are not choosing to see them in that way through the mind of anger. And then, of course, that's the karma that we get, is that outer enemies also even cease to exist in terms of causing us any harm. Everything becomes complementary to us. Patience is the best way to overcome those who are antagonistic to our chosen way of life. It empowers us to bear the austerities of practice with joy, and it protects us from the abuse and criticism of others. It's the best armor, in other words. This is what Master Shantideva says in his text. Patience pleases others, and they want to be near us to help us and to accept our guidance. If we don't retaliate against harmful people, they are more likely to become our friends, right? Patience endows our future bodies with beauty, which makes others automatically friendly towards us, and it gives us the strength to never abandon working for the benefit of others. Otherwise, it will be an obstacle to our bodhicitta developing. And if we are looking at some beings through the lens of anger, that's again what our mind of equanimity that we want to develop is all about, is reducing the tendency to have bias towards certain beings. The last one, even the most conventionally ugly face appears beautiful when it is radiant with love. And this is very true. You look at beings who have loving, kind faces. Even if they're not attractive, the smile, the kind of joy that is radiating from them when they are in a loving place, when they are practicing non-hatred, non-anger, is quite amazing, quite inspiring. So I think there are many benefits to patience, and I'm sure there are many that go beyond what Venerable Gyatso shared. But this is a very important contemplation. And if this is something that feels right to you in the assignment for this coming week, then work with this. Meditate a bit on some of these faults that are in the text and on the benefits of patience, and then try to apply them. Remember karma, the law of cause and effect. And I'm going to talk about two ways of doing that. In regard to the painful situation that you are experiencing, the main cause of your experience of that is your own negative karma. So if you do not want to suffer like this in the future, avoid getting angry and creating the same karma again. We have that phrase in English, right? That insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Well, the problem with karma is most people aren't aware of the results, but they are nonetheless getting angry, having anger again and again and again in their minds, thinking somehow it's going to resolve it and make it a peaceful situation. It never does. It only creates more complication for ourselves and for others. And for ourselves, it creates the causes karmically for us to have those experiences again. So if you have someone who is in your life in a regular way, who is your trigger person, who when they come in, whatever they say, whatever they do, we see the seeds of anger getting fed by all of our mistaken conceptions. Well, that's something really important to pay attention to. That is your karmic creation. Right? That person is your karmic creation, and their appearance as an enemy, as a difficult person, is your creation. You have to change that thinking at that time. If you ever want to be free of that person and the karma that you're creating with them. If you want to keep experiencing it, well, then have got free license to do that. Buy into the insanity. I'm just continuing to do karmically exactly what's going to cause it to arise again and again and again. This is why when we see it in our world, I'm so heartened to finally see what seems like some sort of ceasefire agreement going on with Gaza and Israel and what have you. But my gosh, and then all the talk today too about how this was what we had 10 months ago when back in May, the same agreement, I think it was 10, maybe not 10 months, I don't know how many months ago. They said that like 10,000 lives could have been saved had they actually enacted the ceasefire then. But there's too much of this tit for tat kind of thing going on there. I keep harming you, you keep harming me, I keep harming you, you keep harming me. We see it enacting in this sort of environment, a larger space. It might be a little bit easier to see, but we do the same thing with regard to the people in our lives who trigger us. We keep triggering them and they keep triggering us, and we keep triggering them and they keep triggering us. We have to break free of that. The karma is intense, so we should be very dedicated to avoiding creating the same karma again. And maybe you won't be able to do that immediately, but nonetheless, that's an important thing to work towards. The last part of this, with regard to people who are harming you, not just your experience of that, we have to think about their karma. Think of the consequences that their harmful actions will have for them in the future, and thus how anger towards them isn't really appropriate. Everyone around us is creating karma, and of course, the people who are creating karma who don't even have the concept of it, who don't even know that that's what they're doing. This should break our hearts that these beings are doing these things. We're on the receiving end of this, but karmically, they're going to have to face the suffering consequences of that. So my anger at them isn't appropriate at all, because being under the control of their own anger, doing the various things that they're doing with no idea of how they're creating their own suffering. Remember, I shared that one verse, paraphrased verse from Master Shantideva. Sentient beings crave happiness, desire happiness, but they run away from its causes. Sentient beings don't want to suffer, but they run towards its causes. Right? I think even Elaine shared this in the one Sunday class that I attended with her, where this is what sentient beings are doing. So why are we getting angry at them? Because they are under the control of their own crazy, deluded mind and not even knowing what's going on. They haven't a clue, most of them. Okay. So one thing on this whole idea, I'm going to share one little story. I was working with one student. I won't share who this was, but this person was here in Santa Fe and out by community college. And there's those roundabouts, right? When you go on Richards anyway, most of you know what a roundabout is anyway. In Europe, they're everywhere. In the States, they're not quite as common. But he came to one, and he's like waiting at the roundabout because a car was coming around, and it was some distance. So he probably could have come in and made it fine. But he decided to be really polite and let this person come around and make sure that he was safe to go into the roundabout. Well, there was a car behind him that starts honking their horn because he's not moving, right? And he recognized that, this person had been working with me on trying to overcome their anger. And he gets ready, like they're behind him, and he's looking at them in the rearview mirror, and he's getting his fist up and getting ready to extend his middle finger. But he stops right there with just the fist. And when he told me this, I was like, that's great. Congratulations. I don't know what the person behind him thought he was doing, but but nonetheless, maybe they saw a middle finger anyway because of whatever karma they were having. But the reality is we stop it wherever we can. I remember when I first started hearing teachings on all this, and I was living in San Francisco and driving around on the crazy freeways and everything. It's gotten even crazier now. I mean, I don't know how people live in these big cities and places and deal with all of it. I was getting angry and upset frequently. And I would even catch it after the fact, right? I go, oh, I just honked at that guy and flipped him off or whatever. And at least I caught it afterwards. Give yourself the space to work with these delusions in your everyday life. That's recognizing that change isn't immediate. If we had a little switch we could flip and say, okay, I'm shutting off my anger now, never get angry again, then that would be great, right? But that's not how it works. You have to just become aware, even if it's after the fact, I stepped in it again, but next time I'm going to do better, right? Next time I'm going to try to do better. And not even maybe say I'm going to do better, right? And Yoda says, no try, right? Just do. So we get better at it. We eventually are able to, have a mind that is catching it way at the beginning. When we see just that initial mental unhappiness that's arising because somebody's done something that we don't like. And we go, oh, I can let go of it. I don't need to follow that train. I know where it goes, right? So when you're working with these different thoughts and what have you, especially around anger, it's important to give us some time to work with this. But through time and through practice, we will eventually be able to get there. I shared that, one quote that, we don't rise to the level of our aspiration, we fall to the level of our training. Well, that's because we have to invest in training to be able to have that be sufficient to keep us from going to that place of anger. Just as we saw with attachment, you can recollect impermanence and death here too. Realize how senseless it is to cling to thoughts of anger in the light of death, especially if we were to die. And that's a good thought to have sometimes. When you see the mind going to a place of anger, say, what if I were to die right now? What if I were to this be my last moment? I mean, certainly if you have the misfortune of being involved in a road rage incident, it very well could be your last moment of dying with getting angry and upset at somebody who cut you off, who they think you're in the wrong, and they've got a gun in their glove compartment, and suddenly they're shooting at you, right? So do you really want to die with that mind of anger? But also, I think we can also kind of see it from the perspective of it's not a healthy way to live one's life. And this is something we want to be investing in, is recognizing the value of impermanence. We can actually change things. Situations are going to change. Our minds are going to change. We can actually use impermanence to our advantage. But when we reflect on this fact that, oh my gosh, death can be right around the corner. We never know when. So let's attend to our minds now. Let's make sure that we don't die with a mind of anger. And thus how important it is to maintain harmony and resolve differences while we are alive. Do we really want to go around the rest of our lives hanging on to those thoughts of anger towards beings and what have you? Do we want that to kind of keep welling up within ourselves? Rather embrace the idea that we can change. We can actually use, again, impermanence to our advantage. Another one, recall the nature of cyclic existence and renunciation. Given that suffering is inevitable while in conditioned existence, generate the thought of renunciation, thus making the situation into an invaluable way to grow on the spiritual path. And I often emphasize to people that renunciation is actually said to be kind of the root realization for entering the Buddhist path in a more serious way. In the Lam Rim, which all of you have studied, I'm pretty sure, at the first level where we are looking at our future rebirths and trying to have more control over that, that's a level of renunciation. We are renouncing those unfortunate rebirths that we don't want to end up in. At the second level is where you solidify your renunciation by renouncing all of samsara, saying, this is not actually a pleasure grove. This is actually a prison cell that I am in. and we see it correctly for what it is. And we generate the thought to emerge from it, to be free of it. That's the mind of renunciation. It's invaluable and it's absolutely essential if we are ever going to develop bodhicitta. We have to have renunciation ourselves about in regard to our own situation. So use that suffering to remind you of the nature of samsara. It's part of samsara to get yelled at, to be blamed for something you didn't do, or to, have all this other stuff happen in our lives that we find painful and difficult, that normally we would have anger arising. Well, instead, have the mind of renunciation arise. Go, this is just more evidence of samsara. Similar to what we talked about when we did the course on transforming problems into happiness. And then the most powerful one, perhaps, but I don't put it at the beginning of the list because I think it's actually quite difficult, is to cultivate love and compassion for those who harm. View those who cause harm to yourself and others through the lens of their basic wish to be happy and free from suffering, and their confusion in regard to how to attain those results. I spoke to this earlier, but here we're talking about generating thoughts of loving kindness and compassion on the basis of that understanding. Not just having the understanding that, of course, this is why they're doing these things and causing me problems and others problems in their lives is because they don't have that awareness of karma and what have you. Here, we really want to have a genuine love and compassion for beings because we see that they could have that happiness and freedom from suffering, but they are not in the position yet to be able to attain those. So we generate even thoughts of great love and great compassion. We want to place them in happiness, in the causes of happiness, free them from suffering and the causes of suffering. So important that we advance those positive emotions in the face of a situation that we'd normally have anger arising. Once more, seeing that every moment that is a potential trigger for anger can actually be an impetus for us to develop very positive thoughts and realizations on the path. While I'm at it, well, maybe I'll do this next week. Let's end here because I feel like I've been talking, and it's about 20 after now. Next week, we will finish off anger by looking at belligerence, wrath, all these other or close afflictions. Let me jump forward, though, to the mindfulness exercises. As you come into contact with objects that produce an unpleasant feeling, notice how the mistaken conception of anger or aversion arises, particularly with regard to those 6 factors. This is a similar instruction as what you had for attachment. Work with generating an awareness of what are all the causal things involved. And then at the end there, also notice whether just having that awareness of the process of anger arising can disrupt it developing. Sometimes just like shining a light on it causes it to diminish to some degree. Then also, having meditated on the antidotes to anger, which are the ones we just went through, as you come into contact with objects that produce an unpleasant feeling and you see aversion arising, apply any of those we discussed to see how they curtail the progression of anger. Again, the faults of anger or benefits of patience, remembering karma in regard to oneself and or others, recollecting impermanence and death. What did I do here? Oh, I know what I did. I put in, I think I modified this slide later and I forgot to get rid of the other one. The last 2, recalling the nature of existence and renunciation, and then cultivating loving kindness and compassion. So that's the actual one. I'll make sure I take that other one out. The next one has to do with the close affliction, so we won't do that one. And then again, I will have the readings in there at the end if there are. And I'm going to encourage you maybe, to go back to read the bits that had to do with anger. I'll make sure I include those again. But also, if you want to read ahead on pride, as I said, we'll go into pride next week because I think it is good to deal with that delusion too. It's a common one for a lot of people. So any comments or questions about anger or anything we talked about so far? Here in the Gompa, anyone? Online, anyone? Yeah, Patrick has something to share. Let's get the microphone over there.
I'm just listening so attentively, and I'm wondering if it's okay to bring it up. My father's possibly at the end of his life
Can you move it just
Oh,
a little
sorry.
closer? Yeah.
My father's possibly the end of his life as of the last couple of days. He's hanging on the edge. And go ahead and just say anything. He's just always been very angry.
Mm.
And so I'm just, all this kind of dovetailing my mind. Wow, this has an incredible
Mhm.
resonance to me now. And I don't know how to not be off topic, but how to offer him, if he's going that way, having come into Buddhism, what I have towards him, if he's
Mm.
carrying that with him to the next. Does that make sense? I'm sorry if that's a little inappropriate, but
No,
it
no,
seems
no.
like it's very appropriate to what everything you're saying is resulting. This is over in the hospital, just the other day, non-responsive, and
Mm.
it's falling to me to do all this stuff. And it's just, I mean, I love all this stuff's wonderful, but how to offer him any kind of help or everything you're talking about is resonating with him, being a very angry person and very reactive,
Mhm.
but also very wise and smart. So
Right, right.
that's,
No, and again, we don't always have ideal situations in order to help others, but if there are things that we can share, it's always nice to be able to offer them. And again, if the person's in a position to be able to say yes or no and to, agree to receiving teachings, I always, feel like I need to emphasize with people that while we are on this path of this bodhisattva mentality and we want to help others to be free from suffering and to get happiness, and we are gaining the knowledge of the tools that help us to do that, that there can be this exuberance around wanting to make sure that everybody has that. But we don't want to go to the point of kind of force feeding somebody.
yeah, yeah.
And so oftentimes my first thing that I do with anybody who I think might benefit from the teachings is to say, well, I have some things that I'd be happy to share with you from my own practice and things
Right.
that, that have found useful, but it's really up to you. And would you like me to share those? And then if again, if they're in a position where they can give the approval, then they might be more open to hearing it. And then you can go forward and say, well, there's this one thing that I do and da 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 da, and you can talk about some of this stuff without even getting into karma and rebirth necessarily. And you can talk about once more the faults of anger, or you can talk about how is it possible to maybe even switch places and to see what it's like for the person who's upsetting them and what might be going on in their minds, and just try to get out of that narrow thinking that people often have with the mind of anger. So I think we have to be very skillful, and maybe we're at a position or a point in our own spiritual practice where we don't feel like we have the skill or ability. And that's okay too, then just to say, well, then this is just more evidence that I need to keep working on myself so that I get to a better place with my own practice where I can actually share things with others and help them on in their lives to have more peace and to not have anger arising so much. So regardless of what happens, that we can certainly do that. We can always look at any situation as this is just more evidence once more of how I need to work on myself, how I need to develop better qualities and abilities so that I can truly benefit others. But nonetheless, if there's something we can do in the moment, absolutely, if the door is open for that to happen, from their side, they've said, yes, I'd be happy to hear that. Then we could happily share it, give it to them and say, and then even afterwards say, well, and what do you think about that? How does that sound for you? Does it sound like something that would be helpful to you? Really try to get engaged in a conversation about it so that they kind of process it and see what it would be like to do that. But it can be hard if somebody is really once more very much ingrained in that way of going about dealing with their problems and difficulties to get them to shift or change. But at least to introduce some of these ideas could be really useful.
Not to go on too long, but you mentioned this in my head the last couple of days since you went about habituated.
About what?
Habituated, and that's just kind of resonating with how he is and the way he is, and
Mhm.
people being older, more set in their ways. But
Absolutely.
also not wanting to that line when I want to push this
We'll
on
move
you.
it closer.
Oh, sorry, I don't want to push this on you. Whatever
Right.
it is, I'm being very careful about
Exactly.
that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Patrick, for that question. There is one chapter, the one book that I might recommend for those of you who really feel like you need more help in working with anger. It's called Working with Anger by Venerable Thupten Chodron. There's one or two chapters at the end where she talks about how to work with others who are angry. And so there are some advice that she goes into there in terms of what are the things that can be useful in those sorts of relationships where we have someone in our lives who is frequently dealing with anger. All right. But I think, again, to offer the tools that we have learned from our own experience that we can use can often be really useful. But once more, if the door's open. There's a question or comment, I think, in the chat box from Danny. Thank you. I really needed it, though. I have dealt with my anger. It was very uncomfortable to reflect on the work I still must do. Well, thank you. I'm sorry if I shared that without your permission. But anyway, I think
I
Our
wouldn't have put it there if it wasn't permission. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, Danny, thanks. Just trying to make sure this microphone's working. I think I'm cutting out a little bit in regard to the folks online. But anyway, yeah, I think that we all have to recognize there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, even if we've been working with overcoming our anger for many years, there's still those moments when something else will trigger that we haven't encountered for a while, and then suddenly we find ourselves right back at that place where we're kind of raw and sensitive and what have you. So, Jay, you have a question. I think you were the next one to come up on the online.
Yeah, just a quick comment that sort of I got reminded of this. My mother would have gone to glory being very angry. That was her style, totally. And what helps me in, because I couldn't make much impact there, is that I kind of talk to her still. She's been dead for a few years, and I'm hoping that wherever she is, that she has let go of some of that. And I kind of chat with her about that and send her sort of, different vibes. And I know her background, and I mean, her mother was the same way, and I've had to deal with my own issues. And yeah, I'm hoping that she has a good trip and manages to find a little gentler lifestyle. This is my hope for her, and that helps me. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. I think those are very helpful and positive thoughts. And even if the person isn't there, we can still do our own from our side, what we would ideally like to say to them, what we would ideally like, because that trains us as well to be more receptive to the needs of others. So that when we do meet others in another lifetime or whatever the situation might be, then we'll be better versed in how to help them. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jay. Susan, you have your hand up as well, please.
I had found on the website a handout, a meditation on transforming negative experiences into positive. I found that meditation to be very helpful. I noticed anger arising towards a neighbor, and I worked with those questions on that meditation, like what was the benefit of this anger and how would I like to see it turn out differently, and so on. But it was interesting, the anger transformed into compassion. I generated compassion towards her, and the anger just dissolved.
Wonderful. That's great, Susan. Thank you for sharing that. That's the goal. Again, to change the thoughts that we're having. There is benefit to just not having anger. I mean, don't get me wrong, to be able to be in like a calm, cool, peaceful place. But if we can supplant thoughts of anger with thoughts of compassion, thoughts of kindness towards that person, that's the ideal. That's really what we're aiming for, especially on the Mahayana path. Because once more, every person that we have thoughts of anger towards, and that's what we're holding on to with regard to them, is a block to our ability to embrace all sentient beings, to be able to think of their welfare entirely. So we have to eventually convert it into a much more positive state of mind, like compassion or loving kindness. So thank you for sharing that. I'm glad that that was effective for you in getting to that place. There's one thing that came to mind that I was going to share, but anyway, I'll share it at some point or I won't. Any other comments, questions anyone has? This is great. I mean, once more, this is what we're doing in Buddhism. I mentioned that at the beginning. If we're calling ourselves Buddhist or even saying we're dabbling in Buddhism or whatever label we want to give to it, we have to be working with our minds. We have to begin to pay attention to our minds, to actually see, okay, this is what's causing all of this to happen. Could I do something different that will cause something else to happen? And that's, again, the malleability of the mind, the impermanence of the mind, the changeability of the mind. And that's what we're trying to learn so that we can be in charge. Once more, to know who these roommates are, and when their voices come up and go, okay, well, I have a way of working with you. I have a way of listening your voice. and I'm going to bring the voice of compassion, loving kindness to a greater degree. Tony, yes, so this may be the last comment we have or question, but please unmute and share.
Hi, Don. Hi, everyone. Don, I have an anger problem, and my anger problem, the best way that I can identify it is anger toward the catastrophic. And what I mean by that is when I look around the world and I see what's going on, and especially when I see what this country that I'm a citizen of, its behavior in the world, and especially for the past 61 years, since I was like I'm 19 years old, and not seeing any improvement in behavior of this country in the world. Not that there aren't other countries, but I can kind of look at this country as myself, as opposed to pointing the fingers toward other countries. Going back and starting with the Vietnam War and the lies, and that hasn't changed, other than it's increased. And by paying attention where that has led us to this moment in time, and hopefully we're going back from the brink. And when I talk about the brink, it's a total catastrophic, the end of civilization on the planet, because of the workings of the very few who have betrayed civilization. I don't know how to deal with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Tony, what you're describing, what I was able to pick up, the sound in the compa here for tonight, for some reason, is a little challenging for me. But anyway, I think there still is room for compassion in that, isn't there? I mean, when we look at something, we can get upset at the collective experience that's going on in a country or a world or whatever, and all the suffering that is ensuing from all of that. But it's the same thing, whether it's at a larger scale or whether it's at a small scale. We can look at it through the lens of compassion and understand that it doesn't have to be this way. That there are things that the Buddha taught that can help beings to rectify that situation, and we become even more dedicated to following the path that allows us to help others to do that.
Like, I really can't agree more, because I found this to be my greatest challenge of compassion, or my greatest challenge with generating compassion. Yeah, I mean, it's a great lesson. Hopefully I'll have enough time left in my life to
That's so we all do.
My time.
No, and once more, it doesn't mean that we. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
To rectify at least a portion of it in this lifetime.
Yeah. But I mean, once more, it doesn't mean that we don't do anything about the situation in our world that we can do on a practical level. And, as His Holiness was saying and referred to in regard to this sort of justifiable anger, it is good to bring that kind of energy out into the open, that we can confront what is wrong with our society, our world, capitalism, whatever. I mean, put all the different labels on stuff that we can say there are things that need to be rectified, that are problematic for human civilization and for the health of all of the planet and all the beings in it. Nothing wrong with doing that work, but recognize that we have to do it with the right mindset. And that's the mindset of compassion.
I agree. So I totally agree. And that's what I'm expressing is my challenge at present. I guess because of I find the order of magnitude overwhelming.
You find what? I didn't catch that last part.
I find the order of magnitude overwhelming.
Yeah, I understand. Okay. Thanks for sharing that, Tony.
Thanks for listening, Don. Thanks for listening, guys.
Oh, sure. My heart is with you.
I tried, but that's what this is for, to some degree. Thank you, guys.
Great, thank you. All right, let's do our dedication prayer. I think, again, I already went through the instructions for what I'd like you to work on over the next week. So do your best with that. But once more, remember the little fist up that the story I went through of we need to overcome anger in a very gradual way. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may we quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. We'll do the prayer for His Holiness and think we are creating the karma to have the good health, long lives of His Holiness and all our other gurus, and for all their holy wishes to be fulfilled immediately. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then the prayer for Rinpoche's swift return. Fearless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wear the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And lastly, as usual, they're back now? Anyway, we dedicate for all those beings that we're holding in our hearts. And tonight, try to hold some of the enemy type beings in your heart. Think about those beings who annoy, bother you, whose, again, political views may be very different, who are in a position where we are just taking offense at the things that they do and the actions that they engage in, even the words that they say. Think about sending this positive energy out to them as well as all those others that we feel some compassion towards already. Think that it becomes the cause to remove all of their suffering and bring them to complete total happiness. And may all beings have these same results through what we've done here tonight. Okay, so have fun working with overcoming anger in the next week, and I will see you next Wednesday or possibly before, depending on what class you might do. Okay, everyone be well. Thank you all for joining online. Thank you, Shayla, for
Thank you.
your assistance. I don't know if Shayla's here anymore, but anyway, she had to go. So, all right, thanks so much. Bye-bye.